Welcome to an IEXIST podcast. Our entire mission can be summed up in one phrase: becoming all that we are. It is our belief that fulfillment doesn't come from changing into things you aren't, but rather from becoming everything that you already are. And ultimately, we're here to press and empower you to lead lives that are full of fulfillment. We've dedicated this specific podcast to the dream, not to having the dream or even talking about the dream, but to living the dream. The reality is that there's a stark difference between having a dream and manifesting one. Here you'll gain insight and wisdom keys directly from some of the water walkers of our generation, dream practitioners, those who have decided to tread paths where there were none, to step out into only what they could see. Come take a peek into the minds of some who, from within, create our world's most magnificent realities. I'm the creator and host, Brian Farr, and this is the Living the Dream podcast. Welcome to episode 23 of Living the Dream, the podcast. I hope every single one of you is having the most wonderful of days. First of all, also want to thank you for joining me today. Today is special, and it's special because you're in it, because you believe it is, and because you say it is. And so live out the rest of your day as if it was and is. I believe it is. And I can't wait to dive into what I have to say today. So I want to start what I have to say off with a confession. And that confession is this: that it's taken me a really long time to divulge information in a long form, such as through the veins of a podcast or through long form conversation that's being recorded. Before I started this podcast, which happened to be just earlier this year, I would do things like put out quotes, do short form videos, which started off as 15-second videos, which was the amount of time that you had to do a video on Instagram at the time. And then it expanded to a minute long when Instagram made that transition. So they were short form videos. I believe off the top of my head, I can only really think of 3 projects that would have me divulging information in what I would consider a long form. One of them happened to be my first book that I released in 2018. The visual monologue I did, which actually turned into the book. Before that, that was a 4-part series. And if you put them all together, that's a little bit of a long form piece of content. And I can only think of one other video that I put out that may have been 11 minutes long of me having a conversation with whoever my viewers were in the moment. And I didn't do long form for a specific reason. And it may not be the reason that you're thinking of. It wasn't because I was afraid to share my voice, opinions, wisdom, or whatever with others. It was actually because of a fear that is based from a vulnerability that I have and every single person has who is not well known. The truth of the matter is that when I'm sharing content with you in long form, I'm sharing my thoughts and experiences and wisdom, knowledge, what have you. I'm also sharing a gift with you. What I've realized for a while now is that when I'm sharing information that has become knowledge to me with you, I'm not just passing along what somebody else says or taking what someone else said and just flipping it and telling whoever's listening to me or my audience the same thing in a different way, maybe in the way that I understand it or in just a different way. You know how some of us people have done in the past when you're in school and you know you might not get a good grade on a specific writing test, and then you sought out the help of someone who you know would do well, took their essay and just tried to change some words up so it can look like yours and hopefully fool the teacher. I don't have to do that when I'm talking to you on this podcast or ever. It's honestly been the other way around for me in life, which is very interesting. It's almost as if I was just born with an ability to have something to say or to understand things in a way in which I could formulate it into speech or communicate it in some type of way that hopefully others will understand. And it's honestly been the case that when I find out that someone feels the same way, who's a great speaker from this part of the world or this part of the country or whatever, it's come as a shock to me. And I feel more honestly validated by that than anything because I didn't steal it from them in the first place. So it's not that I'm never inspired or that I haven't learned things from other people, but I don't have to go that route in order to share information. That's why I know it's my gift. And because I know it's my gift, and I also know that there are a lot of people I mean a lot of people who just take what other people say and just flip it or arrange it in a certain way or just steal it all together, who may have a larger audience, etc. And they'll take the credit for it as if it was something that they came up with. Because I knew both of those things, I was afraid to share because the ultimate fear was that I would be stolen from. And you have to understand. Now, if I was stealing, borrowing, or brokering information on behalf of someone else, and someone else took the information that I had stolen and sold it as if it was their own, I probably shouldn't be mad about that. But because I'm the type of person who was born with the type of gift to where I can literally share with all of you or a single person for hours on end, and believe me, I can find a host of people who can attest to this, that I could share with you for hours on end directly from my heart without the help of any guru or doctorate carrying voice around the country or in this world. It affects me differently to be stolen from. And so I feel that it is a valid perspective to have, seeing as I was a person who was born into a situation that made me vulnerable to the elements, for the lack of a better analogy. When you have a gift that has not been covered by a few methods, tactics, strategies, I would even say, that exist that are meant to protect it, that others use, and it's almost this, it's just me and God type of reality that you are experiencing, it only makes sense to me, common sense, that you be concerned about your gift, again, being vulnerable to the elements. And that means all of those who look to steal from, take advantage of, etc. The best way I can put it is that your gift is almost like a baby. Whether it's singing, whether it's doing hair, whether it's helping people cross the street, if you have a love for that, taking care of seniors or older people when they need it, counseling, basketball, or sports in general, whatever the gift is, being funny. It's almost like carrying a baby. And you literally, to me, have to be concerned about how you're carrying it and whose hands you're putting it into, etc. It just makes sense. In all reality, in all honesty, that I wasn't willing to fully express what I had on the inside, outside of the way that I was doing it, which was really just in spurts, trying not to divulge too much of the good stuff, But there is a major issue also of leaning fully into that way of thought. And it's partly because of the fact that you can only get so far with that way of believing. And I actually want to help anyone that is struggling with that same fear. The truth of the matter is, a portion of what's behind the way you're thinking, and I'm saying this honestly as a person who thought the same way, a part of what's behind it is the essence or the residue of a povertist mentality. So if you are that person that is carrying that fear born from the vulnerability of where you are right now in life, I'm not going to do it just yet. But at the end, I want to share with you how I came to a different resolve about how I felt about giving my gift away to the world in long form and letting people really experience my thought in a different way. Of course, I don't believe it's as great as in-person type of situations, but I did decide to change my mind and take on a new perspective. Stick around to the end for that.
Writer, producer, artist, coach, and inspirational motivational speaker, Brian Farr takes us on a deep, retrospective, and introspective journey ranging from his childhood until life today that invokes the question, will I live a life of significance or one of safety? Filled with experience-gained wisdom and revelatory insights, A New Home dares its readers to ask themselves the hard questions concerning their need to fit in. How far will you go? And will all the efforts you've made be worth it in the end? This perspective-shifting discourse is a must-read, and through its hard-hitting yet relatable, tear-jerking, and even at points comical nature may prove to be more of a life-changing event than just a good Sunday morning read. Get your physical copy today at becomingallthatweare.com.
But before I get into that, some of you probably noticed that the title of this particular podcast hints at an event that happened earlier this year whose echo reverberated around the world. Cries for peace and decency and equality and social justice rang from continent to continent, country to country, province to province, state to state. It was an event that won't soon be forgotten, if ever, and I would hope not, so that it is not something that is easily repeated. But that incident was the public execution or murder of George Floyd. Now, I don't want to make light of that subject matter or equate it to something lesser, because that is the bigger issue and still needs to be held in our minds as a moment in time that helped continue to push the needle forward concerning much needed change, reform, and development concerning how we humans treat others that don't particularly look like us or that have outer differences that we justify indecencies because of. That being a real example of unjust actions being taken on a fellow human that literally led to death by asphyxiation is the bigger issue. But in thought over time, I couldn't help but to realize that that event is such a metaphor for so many other social injustices that happen on a daily basis. We, as the human race, have been trying to find ways to keep our knees in each other's necks for a long time, literally attempting to cut the breath, the oxygen, the blood flow in order to prevent each other from being able to breathe or to circulate blood properly, which is representative of our ability to truly live life in the way that we're meant to, that we're supposed to experience real life. We'll try to cut each other off socially, economically, relationally, and honestly, even spiritually in a lot of different ways. I've heard of so many examples over the years and specifically over the past few months of minority groups, specifically the Black community here in America, attempting to get themselves on their feet by creating communities within communities, starting businesses, running for political office, banding together to get themselves on their feet within a society or a world that they realized that if it was going to happen, they needed to do it themselves. And I'm certain that a lot of these stories have come up in part due to the outrage felt across the world of George Floyd's death and many others that died unjustly to the hands of officers and others who did not care enough about their humanity, of course. But these communities that I'm referencing that were trying to be built over the years were all eventually burned down in different states, different areas of this country. And that is a prime example of groups coming together to put their knees on the necks of these minority groups in order to keep them down both socially and economically, or cause them to not to be able to breathe or truly live economically and socially. Probably more widely known and seen on a daily basis is how we like to keep our knees in each other's necks relationally. You know, it's how we talk about each other and degrade each other around certain people so that when that certain person comes around, you've already primed a particular group to not like them. Or if you stop liking them when the person is not in the rest of the group's presence, you prime them not to like that particular person. So we use gossip and hateful speech and false accusations, among other things, in order to keep our knees in those people's necks relationally. And even on the spiritual side of things, those of us who play a major role in not teaching correct information to people concerning the essence of who they are and where they really come from. And I'm specifically talking about those who do this intentionally right now, because not everyone does. But whether intentional or unintentional, even placing yourself in that type of position without really knowing what to say or how to teach, etc., is just as damaging. Or not being personally responsible enough to not just pass on what somebody else has told you, even if it's a parent, even if it's someone you trusted, whoever, but to not go back and look and know for yourself that what you're saying is true is also the type of irresponsibility that keeps people down spiritually. Also, those of us who like to play middleman with God, whether in the form of a priest or pastor that likes to be honored as a gateway or that likes to be recognized as the gateway to God, not just a conduit who teaches others to be the same, but rather a middleman or gateway of sorts who pretends he or she gets to decide who God likes, who he doesn't, who he approves of, who he doesn't, etc. That person is also an example of those who keep their knees in others' necks to even stop them from being able to breathe spiritually. And it's all wrong. Now, I'm not the oldest person in the world or the wisest, I'm sure. but I have lived long enough to have been backstabbed, lied on, betrayed in ways. And I can tell you for a fact that there are people, and you know this, leaders, peers, strangers, blood related family, who through jealousy, insecurity, intimidation, hatred, self hatred, inferiority complexes, a whole plethora of issues, they'll attempt to keep their knees in your neck in one of the ways just listed. They'll steal from you, lie on you, lie to you, degrade you in the eyes of others within their realm of influence in order to rob you of influence. And unfortunately, there are those of us who have to experience people trying to literally and physically choke you out. And there have been many to literally pass from this life for that reasoning. All these and a host of other ways are how so many of us try to keep our knees on the necks of others. Again, literally trying to prevent us from being able to breathe. And listen, I'm not the one who's going to talk about this as if I'm not talking to the one who has their knee in the necks of others. Let's not get too self-righteous when listening to these things, as if it couldn't be you or has not been, which I'm sure at some point it has, whether incidental or intentional. You know, what I'm saying to you is absolutely real. Now, that side of the conversation covers what I would consider the knee in the neck with evil intent, someone trying to hurt you. And believe me, I know I didn't cover specifically a lot of things that could fit in that category. We didn't cover war, mass incarceration, genocide of all people groups, and things like that that have happened and are still happening. But those would all go in the category of things done with ill intent. But there's an opposite side of the spectrum concerning how we keep our knees in each other's necks as a society, as the human race, in all of the same ways, except completely naive or ignorant to the ways we're actually doing it to one another. And I would also say those who are not developed internally enough to do the right thing. For instance, a person who deals with a lot of fear and anxiety that invokes certain actions that inhibits others' ability to truly live or to breathe. So immediately when I begin to consider this side of things, I think about issues such as cultural appropriation. And I want to dive into that for a moment because I feel like a lot gets misconstrued when it comes to subject matters like that. First of all, I'm fully aware that there's a lot of truth to the idea that imitation can be considered one of the highest forms of flattery. And for the most part, I don't really think that there's anything wrong with different people groups respectfully imitating things that they enjoy about other cultures and want to take for themselves, especially when coming from a place of admiration and inspiration, being inspired by that group. But there are a few things that I believe everyone should be conscious of. Now, I do fully understand how disheartening, discouraging it can be to look a certain way or to act a certain way culturally, ethnically, or what have you, and that not even be honored until it's grafted into another people's group's culture, almost seemingly experimentally, or because a particular person or a small group of people from another people group, quote unquote, steal that from you. And all of a sudden it becomes the talk of the town and they're praised for the same thing you were never given honor or credit for. And it really hurts when it seems you are actually being picked on or spoken negatively about for having the same features or attributes, whether it's looks or actions, that were later then taken into a different people group, culture, and those things are now being praised. I fully understand, again, how disheartening or discouraging that can be. But if I could speak for everyone collectively in the world, and I'll be bold in doing so for a moment, because that has an emotional effect on you, and it does not necessarily, in most cases, prohibit your progression or productivity as a group or an individual, I'll step out on a limb and say we can get over that. That's something that just has to be dealt with internally, sometimes just accepted as it is what it is, and just continue to move forward. Because it's an emotional thing, I'll say we can get over that. And let's use one example so that I can be as clear as possible about what I'm saying. Let's say that you're from a particular religion that requires head coverings, or something like that. I'll go ahead and use head coverings as an example. Let's say that from your perspective, the world around you, everyone outside of your religion or your belief system seems to dishonor the fact that you have to wear those head coverings. And so it seems a little embarrassing at times because maybe you're even picked on for wearing them until all of a sudden someone from an entirely different people group, and let's say that's an entire different religion or people who don't even believe in anything. Let's say you see that same style head covering come across a fashion show runway. And then all of a sudden, it seems like all the people who were picking on you for having to wear that are now praising one another for wearing the exact same thing you've been wearing for years, not giving honor to you or even credit for where it came from. What I'm saying is it can be completely, utterly disheartening, discouraging to have to experience that. And these are things that happen all the time with body shapes, with hair colors or hair textures, with skin tones through measures like tanning or whatever. And it becomes something that we fight over and get jealous of when it goes to another people group and they seem to get a lot more attention for it and things like that. I'm saying that, of course, it can be disheartening, discouraging to have to go through things like that. But because it's mainly only affecting you a lot of times on an emotional level, we can get over that. No matter who you are, I'm speaking for the collective. That's something we can grow beyond, having to see it as it is what it is sometimes and continue to progress forward and continue to do what we do without the approval or whatever else we would like to have gained from others. But what we all have to be conscious of are the times that our imitation that might even come from secret admiration actually becomes robbery and another form of having our knees in someone else's neck because it takes away from that individual's or that people group's ability to develop economically, socially, relationally, or even somehow spiritually. Now, let me frame another example that'll bring a couple more issues to the forefront. Unfortunately, a lot of successful businesses, large companies, successful individuals, originators of all types seem to have to just eventually be okay with the fact that somebody's going to steal from them some type of way. Now, that's unfortunate, and it doesn't mean that they don't try to eliminate people feeling like they can just do that or eliminate the amount of cases or times that happens to them. But after a while, I'm only certain that it just becomes a way of like swatting flies or swatting gnats. And it can take away from your progression, your productivity to try to chase down every single person who's finding ways to take from you, especially ones who are not even associated with what it is that you do. Maybe inside the company, it's more important, it's a lot more easy, but some random person on the other side of the world who has formulated some small factory and is on the black market with knockoff retail products that are exactly like yours, or some of the people who may be on the streets of New York doing the same things, replicating items, things like that. Unfortunately, I know for a lot of these companies, it just becomes impossible to keep up with. And whether anyone wants to admit it or not, taking from a brand in that type of way, using their logos or making products super close to where you feel like you just might be outside of legal ramifications, is all still a form of stealing. But let's say you were an independent filmmaker and you started to create films and they actually became pretty popular. And let's also say that this is still the time in which people heavily relied on DVDs as one of their only ways to watch movies. And you find out that someone is making copies of an original DVD that you've sold and they're selling them, or that someone else is giving them away to all of their relatives, etc. Now, you've already been highly successful with your release and made significant financial gain through your movie, which, side note, often becomes the reason why people feel like it's okay or feel justified in stealing from people, because they don't feel like you cutting in on their success is going to do much, with excuses like, oh, they've already made enough money or everybody can't afford that. So, all the excuses that we humans like to make for stealing. But of course, as the filmmaker, you want to cut back on as much thievery and bootlegging as possible. So even from the beginning, you made sure the message comes up at the beginning of your film that states that people making copies and things like that, of course, is punishable by law. And you also make sure to make public announcements as an independent filmmaker to warn people of the consequence and just ask them not to steal because it's not right. But unfortunately, after a while, it becomes, like I said, like swatting gnats. And to pay too much attention to that almost stops your progression from making your next hit movie. Too much attention paid to it will only prevent you from doing what you need to do next. And although they may not be fully keeping knees on your neck because of your success in the way of bootlegging a few films, you're still progressing. For you to stop to pay attention to all of the bootleggers or people who are trying to take advantage of your product in that way would be allowing them to put a knee on your neck because you just need to progress forward. So in that scenario, the people who are taking from you will not feel like they are truly keeping you from living. And the truth is, they really won't be. Not really, even though it's wrong. And that's not me giving you permission to bootleg people's products. But I'm just making a point that will continue on into a few more points. Now, let's say that you're that same independent filmmaker, but you're just beginning to start off into your career and expression as a filmmaker. And you have some great movie ideas. You start your planning, starting to get into the process of producing your first work, trying to get money, trying to raise capital, etc., so that you can do so. And let's say that a much larger, more established multi-film producing company that's been alive for 100 years or so catches wind of one of your ideas. And let's just say for whatever reason, they are short on ideas and know they need to continue to produce films so that they can keep money flowing into their company, so that they can continue to feed their fans and keep their reputation as a great film producing company. And they're getting desperate in this moment and just begin to take people's ideas, scripts, and things like that and put them into film. Take the small independent filmmaker's idea because they see him in that vulnerable position and know that the consequence may not be anything that they cannot afford to get out of due to their leverage, both financially and reputably. In that scenario, that company would represent someone who has their knee in the neck of the independent filmmaker, because not only are you stealing an idea on the surface level, if it is that independent filmmaker's calling and job and decision to get himself out there as an independent filmmaker, and you are taking from them as the large company, you are also cutting their life source off. It's not just a matter of taking a couple ideas here and there that won't affect them long term. You're literally preventing them from being able to breathe economically, socially, relationally. And if you kill their hope, I would even say run the risk of affecting them negatively, of course, spiritually. So it's an economical asphyxiation because the financial gain that the person could have had in being able to fully get their idea off and not be stolen from would have brought financial stability and ultimately, if handled properly, freedom to that person. Social asphyxiation because of the larger company taking credit for and adding to their reputation for the film and not allowing that person, the independent filmmaker, to build their accreditation and reputation with others through the praise of their own work. And relational asphyxiation due to all of the relationships that were not formulated that would have come due to that individual putting their work out, being recognized for it potentially, and also being able to gain relationships because of it in this space or in the area of their profession, etc. And on and on. In both of those cases, there was wrong being done. One, in the case of the bootlegger, and then in the second scenario, in the case of the larger company. But truthfully, only one scenario truly represents what it's like in a significant way to have someone put their knee in your neck. The company in scenario one could go on and live because of their leverage, but the filmmaker in scenario two would feel as if every move he tried to make, it was, first of all, much harder than it should have been. And ultimately, that his life, that his business, that his profession was not being allowed to breathe because of someone in a higher position or in a more recognizable position who kept their knee in that person's neck by denying them the ability to just get their work out without interference which we'll talk about that later too, because no matter what, you're going to have a fight. But also, not allowing that person to get their workout would literally be preventing them from being able to have life, their creations to have life, their company to have life. In a minute, I'm going to have to give you all an even wider perspective on the same issue. And that'll be especially for those, again, who think like I did concerning matters like this. But in both of those scenarios, I would ask specific questions to the parties that were robbing the other. To the bootlegger, I would ask, why don't you just go work for the person that you're stealing from? And let's say that person says, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I don't want to work for anyone in that way. And that opens up two more options to me. And I would say, well, why don't you become an intrapreneur, bringing your entrepreneurial tendencies inside of their company that will help them, since you're such a fan of their products, to continue to expand the brand with your entrepreneurial mind. And if that person said to me, well, I don't want to do that either because I would still feel like I'm working for someone. And then I would ask, well, why don't you partner with that person? Why don't you create a way that you can be a distributor the same way Walmart probably is, and Target, movie stores, Redbox type of situation? Why don't you do that? Because there is a way to legitimize what you're doing without making enemies of the person that you admire or the product that you admire. To the larger company that wants to keep their reputation alive and keep feeding their people, but are all out of ideas. First of all, you probably need to fire some of the people that are working for you. But I would ask the same. Why don't you hire the independent filmmaker to work for you? And they may say, well, it's obvious that the person wants to be an independent filmmaker and doesn't want anything to do with being hired by our company. First, I would say, you never know till you try, but let's go with that. Why don't you partner with that person? Not so that you can just become best friends and who knows how that works out or if that would work out in that type of way. But on a business level, one, you will have legitimized your effort to have content. Two, you will have allowed someone to breathe where you previously had your knee on their neck. And therein, within these examples, specifically the latter, is what I believe the real core problem with an issue like cultural appropriation. Sure, you may not like it when someone takes your swag or your cultural cue who has some other distinction than you and they gain popularity for it or more attention for it. And as I said before, you don't necessarily incur all of the credit for it, things like that. But in those cases, specifically the ones that are not interfering with your ability to breathe in all of the ways mentioned before economically, meaning it's not cutting into finances that could provide you a better way of life, etc. All of the examples I used before. And it's just an emotional effect and you might just get jealous and things like that of their quote unquote popularity for doing what seems to be the same thing, whatever. I'll say again, we as humans should just be able to chalk that up eventually as it is what it is and get over it, because a lot of times that's just what it's going to have to be. And things aren't always what they seem to be anyway. So there's always the chance that you may kind of just be misperceiving what's really going on and accrediting popularity and things like that to a person for a reason that others are not even looking at them in that way for. I can't truly say that there's anything wrong at all with someone imitating you because they admire you. I will say, though, that if that is the motive, just to imitate what they admire, I would say that they should be able to give credit, but that's just me. But the real problem to me comes in when you have larger companies, larger groups, larger segments of people who are willingly taking ideas, cultural cues, things like that from a minority group that has not been able to get themselves on their feet for a lot of different reasons, for maybe them not being as popular or looked at in a way that they should not be. You taking those things and rather than partnering, just taking advantage of what you know could be popular and make a lot of money off of. In those cases, not opening up an avenue through which you gave credit or partnered with those that you got it from are actually becoming a person that is keeping your knee on their neck through your actions. I think the difference is that when there is leverage in one area, And this may not even be intentional by a person that just feels like they are imitating what they admire a lot of times. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that too here in a second. But when you are not aware or conscious of the fact that you've now gained a lot of progress socially, economically, relationally, etc., off of someone else's ideas or identity, you don't always realize that you're stealing from them rather than partnering with them, and maybe the group could do more together. That I can see as a true issue, and why I believe terms like cultural appropriation even exist. The real core issue is when you're robbing me as a more dominant culture or a culture that has more leverage, etc. And sometimes it's hard to acknowledge those things if you are of a dominant, more established culture. But the truth is, when you're robbing me of opportunity and things like that, by taking what it is that I have and using it for your own gain without including me into the process, into the pot, however you want to say it, therein lies the issue, again, with cultural appropriation. Not admiring somebody and imitating them, but underneath what we all have to be conscious of is, are we keeping our knees on others' necks by what we're doing, sometimes in simple admiration, sometimes without even knowing it at all? We have to create opportunities where there were none because of these simple matters. Now, while we're on the topic of theft being a major way that we as humans keep our knees on each other's necks, I'll address a couple things that I even said earlier, specifically about people who just don't have seemingly the internal fortitude to do the right thing sometimes, because you may be a people pleaser, and this could be leaders, this could be anybody. And maybe you feel more forced into stealing and thieving because you're afraid of the outcome of things like partnership, etc. But I want to say this. There are people all over the world who do not want to pay the cost of acknowledging where they get their ideas from, of acknowledging who they actually love, of acknowledging how they really feel, especially publicly. And so they rob others as a consequence. And as a result, again, whether you want to admit it or not, you are a person who is keeping your knee in someone's neck because of that. And I'll give you a few examples. There are a lot of leaders who like to learn from leaders outside of their culture or outside of their specific religion or outside of their social class, etc. Insert color, sex, whatever you want to. Whatever the reason is, they become too afraid to give credit to where they got information from, who they learned from, who they were taught by in certain moments, things like that, because they're afraid of what the people who look to them would say if they knew. Out of a fear of what people might think or say, they won't acknowledge their association with certain people. They carry in them what was probably the pride, arrogance, or fear of a historical person like Nicodemus. They don't want others to know who some of their associations are and where they're actually getting some of the information that they're actually feeding to the people that admire them or that look to them for information. They don't want the people to know where they got their healing from. And so because they are afraid, and in the cases where they're cutting off financial gain and social and relational gain, etc., to a particular person or a group of people, they plagiarize where there should be partnership. You are keeping your knees in the necks of others because it's robbery. There are men, women all over this world who are afraid of what people are going to say if they marry, date, have relation of any type outside of the culture, color, tone, etc., that they're a part of, and will literally settle within a relationship that would not be their first choice, and sometimes even go to the extent of having a secret relationship with who they wanted to be with on the outside of their supposed committed relationship with someone who was safer. All because they are afraid of how people will view them and what people will think about them if they knew of their association. And so in the place of partnership, you have another example of robbery, robbing the other person of the life that they could have. And I'm specifically talking about those who would hide whoever they really wanted to be with. Or even if you're not in a committed relationship and just hiding somebody from your family, from the world that you have around you, you're robbing that person that you're in the secret relationship with of a life that they could have if you would just have it out in the open. And pay the cost for your association, pay the cost for your love, pay the cost. And to me, if you cannot do that, you don't deserve it. That's keeping your knee in the neck of someone you supposedly love. Listen, there's so much I could say about this particular issue of robbery. So many examples, but I hope you're getting the point that that robbery is keeping your knee in someone's neck, intentional or not. It's relational asphyxiation. And I'm not talking to everybody, not those who just take their relationship for granted and think that they want somebody else and don't even know the other person, and not anything crazy like that. But you know when you're the one who made the wrong choice out of fear. You knew the choice you should have made. I'm talking about that in particular, wrong choices being made that become, again, relational asphyxiation because you robbed one person of a particular thing and tried to give it to another, but then you end up robbing both of the parties of true life relationally with you because you can't fully be engaged in either. So anyway, I'll move on from that and all examples of asphyxiation by robbery. But I do want to say this. I actually happen to enjoy to see when the right thing is done and it has been done. I think about stories like that of Dapper Dan's, who was a thief at one point, using a luxury brand's material to formulate his own designs, and he sold them to celebrities and other people on the black market. But that quote unquote plagiarism later eventually turned into a partnership with one of the brands that he was actually stealing from that now legitimized his business. I think about people like Justin Bieber, who has partnerships with a specific writer or people who had a certain gift that may not, through their own artistry, been able to have as much of a reach necessarily because that same glow or that same spotlight might not have been on them particularly in the same way concerning their artistry. But he would partner with them on writing, and their songs could be heard everywhere, and they would also get paid well for the partnership, of course. So their partnership actually gave great writing, great singing. And I'm saying this because Justin Bieber would actually replicate the exact way the writer would sing a particular song. And so it wasn't just lyrics, it was also melody, etc., swag, however you want to say it, trying to capture the essence of the song the way the writer heard it. So think about that. Maybe that writer, Pooh Bear, would not have had such a wide audience had Justin not been willing to partner with him and literally just put his voice on top of everything the writer had already done and his face to it, which magnified the reach. So that's not plagiarism because it became partnership, and he was not stealing from him, but he was admiring him and also paying him, which is what legitimizes the relationship, and also not hiding him and also giving him credit so that whoever else wanted to partake of that person's gift could. Again, the partnership is what made it right. There may be some truth that he may not have been able to get that far without the Bieber face and voice. But again, the partnership is what legitimized all of the actions and the imitation. So I love to see when that happens because what I know is that they were better together. Rather than it being an illegitimate process, it became a legitimate one because where he could have, at least for a time, plagiarized, he decided to partner. And that's what's right to do. So I want to change course really quickly and address all of the people that I said I would address earlier who thought and think like I did concerning my gift and how I wanted to hide it, preserve it until I felt like it was safer to release it because I was afraid knowing that what I had was a gift would be taken from. Now, first I want to say that was a legitimate thought, and I know that from having been stolen from. So I don't want to say that that isn't a true threat. I mean, look at the argument I just made for the last probably 10 to 15 minutes. I don't know. I have to go back and see about the fact that humans steal. It's true. I know. I've taken certain ideas, reworked them for my own cause, etc. I know this is how we work. We imitate. It's how we learn to walk, to talk, things like that. That is a human skill, actually. So it's not an illegitimate concern, nor is it a bad excuse if you wanted it to be. But the problem is that it's anti-productive. It will not allow you to get anywhere in life worth being when you're too afraid or when you're too concerned about those instances. Like I said before, at some point, even if you are not the well-established entrepreneur, well-established creator or whatever, It becomes like swatting gnats, and you have to trust that none of the work that you're going to do will be in vain. And I'm telling you that it won't, despite who tries to come against you or who tries to take from you or anything like that. Also, no one can do it like you, especially when it's your gift. Oftentimes, the people who are stealing from you don't even have the gift to do what you're doing, which is why they're stealing it. If they had the gift, they wouldn't have to steal it. And so if they don't have the gift, they can't even do it like you in the first place. So there's only so far a gnat could get. Plus, if it is your gift, it will not run dry. I will tell you, as a person who knows I am gifted to do what I'm doing right now, I do not run out of material. There's no such thing. If you knew how much material was just ready and waiting for me to release it, why? Because I am a creator of content, and the well just doesn't run dry. And so when it's your actual gift, you do not run out of material. So being caught up on trying to prevent someone from taking one particular thing is also, as I said before, the signification of a poverty mindset, which means you just need to understand the abundance of your gift. On one level, you need to understand that nobody could take the amount of what you have on the inside of you. And if everyone living took one piece and you fed the entire world somehow through their stealing of one particular thing that you put out, you could still have more, because that's the way your gift is designed. Now, I'm not saying be easy and just allow people to steal from you and take advantage of you and don't protect yourself. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that you have to start with the mindset of abundance, understanding that your gift will supply and supply and supply and supply. Again, it is a well that does not run dry. Whatever you could create, you could do it again and again and again. If you were a creative hairstylist and that was a specific hairstyle, you could create 10 more of those without thinking about it. If it was a particular person who had a special recipe, you could create thousands of those and even more. Again, don't have this mentality where you're just holding on to the little bit you have, trying to stop somebody from stealing it, not realizing you have more than just a little bit. You could fill the world with the amount of product that you could create when you are a genuine and true creator. Again, not the people who are stealing, who don't have that gift and just want to partake in your gift and won't tap into their own for whatever reason, or partner with you. And that way they could add whatever skill they have to the table. You have to understand that your gift is abundant. If you think about people who tell jokes and who genuinely do it, people who write songs, how many songs these people have. Lil Wayne came to my head a second ago, and I'm remembering conversations that he's had with people in interviews and things like that about how many songs he has. And he doesn't even write anything down. He just goes into the studio booth and says what comes to him. And it comes out at a genius level because that is a part of his gift. So he doesn't run out. Go study the lives of people who are obviously walking in their giftings, in their callings, and who have done what they were put on the earth to do, at least in part, and have spread their gift. And pay attention to how abundant that gift is. It could feed everybody and more. So I don't want you to have this mentality as if your gift is not abundant. If you can write one song, you can write 10, you can write 1,000. I'm sure you could write 1,000,000 if you really tried. And I'm sure there's people in history who might actually have. I don't know. I'm just saying. I know it's possible. Not saying that 2 or 3 of them might not sound the same, but listen, you cannot allow that poverty mentality to be a stop of you sharing. Also, I want you to know that, and I'm stealing this phrase from Tony Robbins. I'm giving credit, and I always do, to be honest, because I don't have to steal. I told you I have material for days. But he said, the secret to living is giving. And this goes back just a little bit to what I was saying before about how when you don't unveil and avail your gift, when you don't uncover it and let it go, you are literally holding up your own productivity. You're not sharing with the world what you were intended to share with the world. And that can only hurt you. Again, the secret to living is giving. And if you don't learn to give your gift away out of that abundance mentality, out of that abundant place that was set inside of you, you will never reach abundance in life, relationally, economically, socially, spiritually, anything. You have to learn to give. That is going to start the cycle in your life that you want to create anyway. And for the record, not everybody steals. For you to focus on the few people that may try to do that would be a mismanagement of your gift also. There are thousands of people who need to hear from you or need to experience whatever your gift is, and they will appreciate it and they will reciprocate and things like that. But you holding on to it, it's not going to get you to where you want to go. It's not going to enable you to live your dream. You got to get more trusting. And I wasn't, and I know I'm not the most trusting person in the world. But at the end of the day, what I have to trust is the process, and that releasing the information, releasing my gift, you releasing your gift, everyone releasing their gifts into the world will pay off. What I trust is that you will reap what you sow. You might not reap where you sow, but you will reap what you sow. And so I know that this world operates that way, off a reaping and sowing. You do not have the ability to sell anything to the ground, I should say. You can only sow into it and wait for it to come up. And these are the things you need to be focused on when it comes down to your gift. Do not allow any type of poverty mentality that may have come from, where you grew up or the circumstances you grew up in, anything like that. You cannot be afraid. You have to operate out of an abundance mindset. Get to know yourself, get to know your gift. The truth is you won't be able to exhaust it. It's just that full. And you need to trust that there's way more good out here than there is bad. We have a tendency sometimes to have a local news mentality in which you might get one or two good stories, but because the network or the station knows that people are particularly drawn to the negative more, and the negative is what spreads like wildfire before anything good does, they'll fuel the programs, especially these news programs, with a lot of times negative information. And you have to be sure that you are not operating the same way, that you are not fueling your eyes with negative perspectives, that you begin to trust and live in this world knowing that what you give out will come back to you. And I mean it in a good way. A lot of times people use that in a negative way to try to say, hey, you better not do bad to me or it's going to come back to you. And while that may be true on a lot of different levels, I'm saying to you to trust that when you do good, when you do put your gift out there, when you are consistent, when you do have discipline, when you are doing everything that is key to living your dream, which I'll talk about some of those things in another episode, you have to trust that it will come back to you. You have to trust that it will come back to you. When you are generous, you're the one who is made wealthy or that receives riches through your generosity. Of course, there's wisdom in everything, but just listen, you have to trust that it will come back to you. If the world, and I'm ending on this thought, and this is a thought that I got through Gary Vaynerchuk. If the world was as bad as you pretend it is, we would have all killed each other a long time ago. But there has to be way more good than there is bad if 8 billion people or more are able to coexist on this planet. Yes, we all know that there are terrible things happening everywhere, but the good has to outweigh the bad if we're all coexisting. When the potential of everyone being evil would be catastrophe, this planet would have been gone. Think about that. So I'm saying to you, trust, give the gift away, be of service to others through your gift, and watch it come back to you. Listen, I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. Of course, can't wait to get back to you again next week. But I want to say, if you have not already followed me on social media, please do so. You can find me at Brian Farr. That's BRYANPHARR. Also, if you have been listening to this podcast in general and have not yet left a review, please do so on the listening platform of your choice. If you want to connect with me, you can do that through social media. If you have any questions to ask or anything like that, you can do that there. Also, visit becomingallthatweare.com to find out more about the IEXIST brand, which is a wellness brand. You can shop merch there. You can see the coaching services I have available there personally and other things. Just check that out. If you're interested in supporting the movement to continue to propel purpose into the world, make that popular through the veins of IEXIST, you can do so at patreon.com/Brian Farr, patreon.com/Brian Farr. And you can partner financially with us to help to continue to spread the word that all is well. And lastly, I appreciate you for listening, every single one of you, wherever you are on this planet. I can't help but to be grateful, even just so far. Thank you. Spread the word. We got a lot of stuff coming. If you've been listening, you know by now that it is my desire that through this you would prosper and live your dream. And until next time.